I just snapped a bleeder right off my caliper. So today, I'm going to show you how to replace an old and possibly damaged caliper out for a new one.
There we go.
So let's get started with some tools. The only requirement, in my opinion, is the torque wrench. Every bolt should be torqued when it comes to brakes. As for sockets, we'll only need these 4 sizes, and they don't need to be deep well. Before we lift the wheel off of the ground, there's a few bolts that I want to break loose. This is one of the bracket bolts. There's another one up top that we're going to get in a minute. But these can get torqued all the way up to 190 foot-pounds, so I like to deal with them first. The same thing applies to the lug nuts. Unless you have an impact, loosen them while the wheel is on the ground. Alright, now we can get this side up in the air. With full access to the caliper, you should loosen the banjo bolt up first and lightly tighten it back down. If not, it's going to be a pain later on.
Shit.
As for the caliper, there's just 2 bolts holding it on. These can also be Allen heads or even Torx heads, depending on if it's ever been replaced. Opening the caliper seems like a straightforward deal, but depending on what side you're changing will affect how it opens. On the passenger side, the top will swing open first, as you see here. However, the driver's side is switched, so the bottom will actually open instead. With that off, we'll rest it on the leaf spring till later on. The 2 bracket bolts can now be fully removed. So that completes the teardown. Let's start swapping things over. The new caliper came with fresh brake clips. However, they're a little bit different, so there's nothing wrong with reusing the originals as long as they're in good shape. The brake pads also have plenty of life left in them, so we'll push them into the new bracket. With the pads loaded in, the bracket can be bolted on by hand. Now it's time to grease the new caliper. I was under the impression that calipers came pre-greased, but they don't, so I had to go back and do this. And by grease, I of course mean silicone paste. Wheel bearing grease and anti-seize should not be used here. They simply don't hold up as well as this, and they can cause problems later on. I'll have a link to the one that I'm using here down below. We'll start by adding some to the slide pins. These don't need to be drenched, just a nice coating all the way around. As the pin goes back in, make sure to rotate it to spread that grease around inside. While doing this, be mindful that the boot may scrape some of that paste off. So just make sure that that pin slides back and forth smoothly. Next we'll hit the piston faces along with the contact points on the other side. Same thing here, just a light coating. Alright, now we can add the calipers onto the bracket. Sometimes the slide pins get in the way, so just make sure they seat properly. While putting in the slide pin bolts, I found that lightly picking up on the caliper helps get them started. This part is completely optional, but I noticed that the bleeder hex on a lot of these newer parts have been getting shorter and shorter. It might not seem like a big deal, but it really does make rounding the bleeder way easier. So I like to swap those out right away for these ones I got off of Amazon. The hex is a little bit taller and easier to grab with a wrench. Again, this is completely optional. It's finally time to swap over the line. There should be 2 brand new copper washers in the caliper kit. One goes on top of this block and the other one goes on the bottom. These are the crush washers that create the seal. Some fluid will spill out during this, so have a few towels on hand. Some crush washers don't always seal to the banjo bolt right away, even when torqued properly. So I like to give the banjo bolt a few light taps, and then retorque it. As for torque specs, it's always best to look up the proper specs for your exact truck. I torqued the banjo bolt to 28 foot-pounds. The next part of this can be done with the truck still in the air. I just prefer to put the tire on and lower it back onto the ground. There's some debate on whether using blue Loctite is appropriate for the bracket bolts, due to the heat that the brakes generate. But personally, I like to add a small line of Loctite and torque it to spec. I think it's worth using as Loctite acts as a rust barrier. For the bracket bolts, both of them got torqued to 150 foot-pounds, and the slide pin bolts went to 25 foot-pounds. As for the lug nuts, they were torqued to 150 foot-pounds in a crisscross pattern. Again, check with your model for the exact torque specs. Lastly, I did a quick brake bleed to remove any air. Don't forget to push the pedal down a few times to get those pistons pushed out against the brake pads. So that's how I swapped out my brake caliper. It's a pretty straightforward job, just make sure everything's tight. So that's all for this video. If you want to see how I rebuilt the rest of my brakes, you can click this video right here.